chapter, I should say. Just wanted to cover a few things before we get going. Hopefully everybody had time to get some appetizers and some drinks. I just want to go over a few things with education. We have education and training classes. There is a planners seminar coming up 5/6 through 5/8. That is on the calendar, so if you haven't seen that, if you're interested in that, just check out the website. Also, CPIM 2, which is at Davenport University, starts on April 30th. So if you're interested, there's still slots open for that. There's also a couple initiatives through Grand Valley University through the mentorship program. And if you're interested in that, what it entails is if you would like to become a mentor to a senior at Grand Valley State University, it doesn't entail a lot of time, but just to touch base with them or maybe stop and have coffee with them or email or even have a phone conversation with them several times, just to give them some experience, some of your life experience as they are entering into the working world. So kind of gives them some, I guess, some backbone to get out there and get a few things done and get some good advice. So if you're interested in that, please see me afterwards and I can get you the information on that. Also, in conjunction with Grand Valley State, they also have a supply chain consulting program. And if you're interested in that, what this would entail is if your company, what they try to do is they have a class that they surround around kind of like a project management or a supply chain solutions type program. And what they would do is if your company was interested, you would assign them a problem, and that group of people would be assigned to tackle that and come to you and present you with solutions to that problem. So maybe it's something down on that's 10th or 12th down on the list of 100 things, or very at the bottom that you don't have time to do right now. But this might be a good way to also meet new recruits for your organization. So if you're interested in that also, please check it out. You can either contact myself afterwards or Randy Gilbert is in charge of that. So if you're interested at all. Okay, and it's also getting to be that time of year. We are looking, we're at the tail end of our 2017-18 program year. I gotta get the years right here because they cross years. And we're going into 2019 and 20. So, did I say that right? Yeah, okay. So we are looking for anybody interested that may want to be interested in joining the board of the APICS-Grand Rapids chapter. So if you do have interest, please let any one of the board members know. Ron Kopp is here tonight. Kathy Bosher is over there. I'm here. Anybody else here? Zach Owen's here. So if you guys are interested, the more the merrier. We'd love to have you on. A lot of good things happening for this next year, and we'd like to kind of spread the wealth a little bit and get some new ideas onto the board. So if you're interested in that, please see us afterwards or one of us and let us know of your interest. Okay, without any further ado, we'll get going with the program here tonight. And I gotta find my, okay, too many papers. This is not just so you know, this is not my favorite thing to do. I'm a behind the scenes guy, okay? But here I am. Okay, so tonight our two speakers are Deb Smith and Randall Schaefer. I want to introduce Deb Smith first. She holds multiple certifications in CPIMF, CIRM, CSCP, and is a seasoned practitioner with experience in automotive, office furniture, aerospace, recreation, mass merchant, and other industries. Deb has also held a range of positions within the supply chain field, including product information and planning manager, product engineering, production, inventory control manager, systems manager, and data processing manager. She is a contributing author to the Society of Manufacturers Engineers Handbook, Material and Parts Handling and Manufacturing, and has had several articles published as well. Deb has been a frequent speaker at the APICS events, including APICS International Conferences, and enjoys instructing certification review courses. Also tonight, Randall Schaefer is speaking. They're splitting their time together tonight. Randall is also a CPIM holder, editor of the popular Lessons Learned features in the APICS magazine, is a veteran speaker of APICS and other manufacturing-based groups. Randall is an industry leader or industry philosopher with 49 years of manufacturing management experience in such diverse industries as automotive, capital equipment, farm machinery, and appliances. He has a degree in philosophy from Wisconsin State University, Stevens Point, has been APICS certified for over 30 years, and has done a tour of duty on the APICS CIRM testing writing committee. Randall is a veteran of the APICS instructor who taught the APICS CPIM review classes, as well as his own seminars on inventory management and cycle counting. He is a veteran speaker at APICS international conferences, as well as chapter meetings of APICS and other manufacturing-based professional organizations. Randall is a regular contributor of feature articles in the APICS magazine and edited the popular Lessons Learned feature for 20 years. He is the co-author of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers Handbook, Materials and Parts Handling in Manufacturing. Please join me in welcoming both Randall and Deb.
I hope this is what you're expecting tonight, because that's what we're going to talk about. 5 metrics we hate. You've heard of the dirty dozen. Deb and I occasionally call this the filthy 5. So, what's a metric anyway? There we go. A metric is a criterion. It's a standard. It's a measure. It's a consequence, like what happens if you make it or don't make it, and it's used to evaluate performance and reinforce company values. Reinforce company values? Did you think your company values were stated on the mission statement out in the lobby? No, no. What we measure, people take seriously. What we reward and punish, people take really seriously. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, metrics. Our perspective is this, our meaning Deb and I. We believe there are some common supply chain metrics that are misused, misaligned, misunderstood, or just plain worthless. And there's probably more than this, where we're going to talk about the 5 you see right there. Inventory turns, PPV, shipping schedule attainment, available capacity, and cycle count reporting. Those are the worst offenders in our opinion. First one we're going to talk about is inventory turns. Well, there's a common formula for calculating your inventory turns. What's the annual cost of goods sold, determined by what your annual average inventory was at the end of probably each month. That's probably how it's done. And it's used to compare similar companies and measure internal trends in your own company. Are you going up? Are you going down? How do you compare against those terrible competitors of yours? And too many times your management will set the competitor standards and their results as yours, which meaning you're now following a company probably as equally screwed up as your own. Okay? What's wrong with this metric? I mean, even if it's not foolishly applied, what's wrong with it? Well, here's what's wrong with it. We think it's meaningless. There's just too many assumptions here. We assume less inventory is always better. Everybody here knows there's times when that's not true. New product launches where you're stocking inventory, where you're going into a holiday season and your product is something that's very popular as a holiday gift. It assumes all inventory is equal. But can you instantly discard obsolete inventory without figuring out why it's obsolete? How about slow-moving inventory? Did you make that slow-moving inventory, or was it the result of a bad forecast or something like that? How about build-aheads? How about when you're in the auto industry and there's a new model coming on and you're a supplier to that new model and they want a bank? All sorts of things occur that inflate your inventory. But it doesn't matter, because the inventory people are going to be held accountable under any circumstances, and I guarantee you the people at the top don't know what goes into your inventory. They're just going to blame the inventory people for whatever it is, and the accountants have one comment: lower it, whether it makes sense to do or not. So that's why we don't like it. It assumes that inventory exists in a vacuum. It does not consider your strategy, your sales and operation plans. Oftentimes, you've got a huge production volume coming up for, let's say, Christmas, and you'd better sell that off pretty quick, or you're going to be blamed for the inventory level, because the inventory level that is the target is X, but during the year it goes like this, and occasionally it's right on X. Those are the months you want the report to be known to all. But mostly, it's not. Okay. But in spite of all that, there's even one bigger problem, is that top management always expects the supply chain manager to manage all of it. For increasing the turns, and assuming that he can handle or manage all that inventory, and he can affect it all, which isn't true at all. The key to this metric is that bottom line. Inventory management requires only the exact quantity at the time of consumption. That, if you're in inventory, that's what you need. You got so darn much more. It's because other people need the inventory, not you. Lot sizes, safety stocks, other things are instigated by other people. They may be put into the computer by the inventory people at the request of other folks, but you don't need that inventory. The alternative to just measuring the inventory level, we believe, is to define who owns the various types of inventory. And ownership now is a concept. I don't mean who owns it financially. I mean who's responsible for it, who owns it, in that sense. For instance, finished goods. Who's responsible for the finished goods? The inventory people? No, they just need the finished good, the exact amount that is due to be shipped today. They need it today. That's all they need. So why do you have a warehouse full of it? Who needs that? Sales and marketing need that. So why are sales and marketing not held accountable for the finished goods inventory? It's their doing. How about purchase material? Do you ever have more purchase material than you need? Well, of course. Sometimes you buy parts in standard packages that are more than your exact requirement. Sometimes you have to accept a larger lot size to get the best price. We understand that. But that's not inventory management's doing, that's purchasing doing. So why aren't purchase parts under the authority and the responsibility and the accountability of the purchasing people? They should be. How about work in process? Why do we have so much work in process? Well, because we have large lot sizes, because those machines over there take a half a day to set up from one part to the next part. So we need large lot sizes. Oh, are you responsible for those setups? Who is? Why aren't they being reduced? The superintendent, whatever the title is, first line supervisors, those are the people who have to address the work in process inventory, because it's their lot sizes, their lead times that create the work in process inventory. You don't need it, they do need it, so they should be held accountable for it. Well, there's safety stocks, stuff on hold, rejects. You know, there's lots of reasons you have inventory out there. And I'm saying that everybody who's responsible for inventory should get a report. Instead of, here, Mr. Inventory Manager, our goal is to have 10 turns a year and you're only at 7.5. What's the matter? When are you going to fix it? The real question is, when are the people responsible for the inventory going to fix it? I say we report inventory turns by the ownership, by who's accountable for finished goods, work in process, purchase parts, whatever your inventory is. Somebody is responsible for it being there. Somebody told you guys to add this to the computer because that's what they need to be safe. You don't need it, they need it. Okay? So how do we achieve improvement? Well, first of all, you've got to convince your accounting department to put out multiple inventory reports by ownership. One report for finished goods, one report for purchase parts, one report for, you know what we've talked about. And hold people accountable. And each one should have a separate target for being reduced until they get to something more reasonable. And you then set metrics. Align your metrics with those goals. We improve because each owner of finished goods, purchase parts, work in process, whatever, they strive to drive their lot sizes towards 0 and drive their lot sizes toward 1 and their lead times towards 0. Now, they're never going to get that good, but you got to push and push and push at it. And you don't just go in like I had a manager years and years ago said, oh, we can reduce it. Just go in and reduce all the safety stocks by 50%, cut the lot sizes by 2/3, and we'll be fine. Really? No. There is a reason those safety stocks and lot sizes are in there. You don't just reduce the lot sizes and the safety stocks. You reduce the need for the lot sizes and the safety stocks. And you reduce that slowly, one part number at a time, by pushing your lot sizes toward 1 and your lead times towards 0. The goal is to optimize your lot sizes and lead times for every single item. Now, that may actually reduce some lead times. It may actually, or some inventory. It may actually increase inventory, because if you're as messed up as most companies are, you have a lot of things you have too much inventory of, but there's a few things where you don't have enough inventory of consistently. So it might go up or it might go down. By doing this, you're going to simplify the planning process and the production process, and you're going to find that when people start taking accountability and accepting that I am responsible for needing this inventory, and I will be responsible for reducing my need by taking some direct action that everybody knows how to do. We all know how to get lean, don't we? You know, why is just the inventory people got to get lean? So, if you follow this plan and you're working it down, pushing your lot sizes toward 1, your lead times towards 0, you can go back and tell your boss that the guy up on the stage tonight said, whatever our inventory is the right inventory. It's the right amount for now. And then you go and create a better now over time. Deb, would you like to disparage personal price variance for us?
Personal?
Yeah, purchase price variance. Sorry.
Thanks, Randall. Yeah, our next not-so-beloved metric is purchase price variance. It's a common supply chain management metric among most or many companies. How many of your companies or companies you've worked for measure purchase price variance? Show of hands? Okay, lots of hands around. And you may not know whether or not a company does. But it's applicable widely to companies that buy purchase parts or purchased raw material or services or outside processes or even completed finished goods for resale. So, you know, that kind of defines most companies, somewhere in there. And purchase price variance is the difference between the actual price paid and some pre-established price. Think about that, a pre-established price. Where did that price come from? That's part of why this is not such a beloved metric for us. So a question for all of us: by what methods may a company achieve a favorable PPV, purchase price variance? And a favorable PPV is one in which the actual price paid is lower than that pre-established price. How do you do that? How do you do that? How's it done in your company? Oh boy, don't we love it? Large lot size. We just heard from Randall on that one. Yes, the larger lot size, you can get a quantity discount. Sure, let's go for it. What else? Paul? Move to a cheaper supplier. You know, we don't want to go into the definition of cheap right now because, yeah, we need a less expensive supplier, hopefully, but you've got to watch out for the word cheap in there because quality could be at risk as a result. So, but yes, negotiating or finding a supplier with a lower cost. Let me put it that way. May I, so that we aren't moving toward cheap. Other legitimate ways to achieve favorable PPV. How about just negotiating with the supplier? Maybe working with your supplier to help with quality improvement and their own process cost improvement. How about helping a supplier acquire materials? If your supplier is the small fish and you're the big fish, maybe you can obtain some material discounts for them or help them obtain those material discounts that then become a discount to you. Anything that you can do to reduce cost for your supplier, reduce risk for your supplier, and provide knowledge and information to your supplier is likely to create an opportunity for them to be able to reduce their costs. So help them with providing information, perhaps even a material authorization or fabrication authorization, so they aren't running blind trying to figure out what you may need. Make it easier for them. Those are legitimate ways to achieve favorable PPV. A second question, are there perverse incentives to manipulate the PPV? What kind of incentive, I'm seeing some nods, what kind of incentives have you seen to achieve, that folks would receive or would occur as a result of achieving a favorable PPV? Yes. So there's an incentive to manipulate the PPV, or it's at least it's a scenario where attempting to find a less expensive supplier and going through all the processes ends up costing more in the long run. So hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in testing, especially in safety and crash testings, for example, and it can wipe out the PPV advantage if it's going to cost too much to try to get there. Ooh, those costs are hidden in somebody else's department, right? That's a big piece of it. What other kinds of incentives? How about, say, a bonus for favorable PPV, or salary increase, or promotion potential, or perks, cars, cruises, club membership? What do you get? I don't know if everybody heard that. Jim said, I said perverse. Those are good things. Let's see. You know, it's sort of like who's watching the store, because we're going to look pretty soon at who helps create those pre-established costs against which PPV is calculated. Well, before I go too far, though, I want to say that it seems like I'm just picking on purchasing. Anybody here in the purchasing arena? Yeah, sorry. No, but we aren't. We're not just picking on purchasing. You can look at many other groups in an organization and find perverse incentives to manipulate a metric. Picture the sales group that's incentivized by cars, cruises, and cash to exceed the forecast targets, right? they're part of creating those targets, those quotas. And think of the chaos that rains down on production operations, supply chain, and customer service when you end up with demand increasing by 20 to 30% across the board. Oh, that's a perverse incentive, all right, and everybody else pays for it. Sort of like Randall was talking about, who pays for this? What we don't like is how things can be subverted with purchase price variance. Who sets that cost standard? Is purchasing part of setting it? Is it accounting? Where do the inputs come from? Is it looking back to history? Is it looking forward? What are the standards based on? A large lot size, a small lot size? Long lead times, short lead times, and what kind of a horizon? Once again, are we looking forward or backward? Is it multi-year contracts? Does spot buying for cost come at the expense of quality? I have an illustration of that one from a multi-plant, first-tier, original equipment automotive supplier that Randall and I know very, very well. In 1 year, the purchasing department achieved greater than $1 million in favorable PPV, and the purchasing manager received a substantial bonus based on those results. Soon after, a new position, Director of Materials, was created and filled, and the president of the company told the new director that he, too, would benefit from payouts of future bonus pools based on PPV. Well, the new director investigated the source of the favorable PPV and found that most of it, the bulk of it, came from one commodity with numerous part numbers, steels. Concurrent investigation into massive year-over-year increases in scrap, rework, and tool repair costs showed that the bulk of those costs came from production operations involving those same steels. The purchasing manager had been making spot buys for material that was just a little bit off spec. Just a little bit off spec. Issues of material were hardness, cracking, extreme gauge variability throughout coils, and even rust. And in the end, the $1 million favorable PPV was more than offset by $1.5 million increase in scrap, rework, and tool repair costs. Does spot buying for cost come at the expense of quality? In this situation, this example that I just gave, there were qualified suppliers under contract, but the spot buys did them in. I won't go into the details of how and when the purchasing manager exited, but he did. Or who the new director of materials was. Okay, other potential subversions. Does PPV come at the expense of customer service and flexibility? That ties us back to large lot sizes, long lead times that don't allow for, as well, for customers to get have flexibility on your part and responsiveness. And the final one we have listed here is transportation cost included in the item cost? Some companies do that. Is there anybody here whose company adds transportation cost to the item cost? Okay, several do. Somewhere transportation cost has to be accounted for when looking at the calculation for PPV, or what really is the value of PPV. We should be looking at total landed cost. You know, what's the difference, or what's the relationship between having a unit cost of $1 from Charlotte, Michigan to Grand Rapids versus 95 cents from Charlotte, North Carolina to Grand Rapids, Michigan versus 90 cents from China, and the potential for air freight due to delays in coming from overseas. So is transportation cost included? If it's not, it should be part of the consideration. But not everything has to do with cost. If you're a cost-driven company, such as a highly competitive commodity business, cost is going to be very important. And cost is always a consideration. But it's the low costs that's the goal, not variance against some pre-established number. What's the focus? Not comparison to some standard. And for many companies, low cost really isn't the goal. What are the order winners and order qualifiers in the industry? If your business competes on image or brand like Harley-Davidson, on delivery like Jimmy John's, quality like Lexus, flexibility, variety like Amazon, innovation like Apple, or any of the other potential order winners or competitive stances, then cost isn't the number one deal. Always a consideration, but not the number one. If a company's strategy is not to be the lowest cost in the marketplace, then spending our time focusing on PPV may not really get us as far as we think it will. A company whose strategy is, well, in fact, if it says here, PPV focus may be counterproductive. It takes our eye off the ball, takes our eye off the order winners, takes our eye off of what we're in business for. If the strategy is lowest cost, however, we need to be sure that we're using balancing metrics to avoid the impact of perverse incentives to manipulate the PPV. Balanced metrics such as inventory turns, and Randall talked about that, transportation costs, material, inbound freight. When I say transportation costs, that would largely be inbound freight, but those sorts of balancing metrics. However, if we still have perverse incentives, PPV may just give us the appearance of improvement without actual improvement. And remember, unless you are in the situation as that multi-plant first-tier automotive supplier, nobody tends to investigate the good numbers. But if you have numbers that are too good to be true, maybe they are. Maybe take a look at them, investigate them. Randall's going to take over for our third in our list of metrics.
Shipping schedule attainment. You all your companies probably have measures like, we were supposed to ship 100 shipments this month, and of that we shipped 14 on time. Or some, hopefully it's better than that. Does anybody have a metric that sounds kind of like that? Yeah, everybody's nodding and shaking hands. Deb and I would like to give you advice, stop it. It's useless. That's why it's useless, because we don't know what we're measuring if that's all we're measuring. For instance, are we measuring how the factory performed? Like, was there quality problems? How about raw material or tooling problems? How about we didn't have the right people trained, so when Mary Ann had an appendectomy, there was nobody who knew how to run that machine? Is it capacity? You know, is it something like that, which, you know, we were falling short in the factory on operations, so we had a bad shipping attainment that month? Or are we measuring our promise performance? Did somebody accept an order with shorter lead time? That probably never happens anymore, does it? Did some salesman come to you and say, hey, I know the lead time is normally 10 weeks on this, but if we can ship it in 7 weeks, they're going to come back and give us a lot more business. Sure they will, and it'll be 7 weeks from then on. And they never understand why we have no enthusiasm at all for that kind of thing. Is that what it is? Or did we forecast something incorrectly? We said there's going to be X sales approximately, and it was way more or way less. Either one is going to get the inventory people blamed, okay? Or how about safety stock? This is a fairly mature product. Let's just put a 5% safety stock on it. That doesn't come from inventory. That comes from other people. And then suddenly there's serendipitous sales. And boom. That same company Deb was talking about, back in 1987 or 8, Ford introduced the Taurus. It was their #1 mid-size family car, and they were expecting really great things from it. And they gave us a forecast, and we looked at that because we had never seen a Taurus. We looked at the forecast because we had several parts on the Taurus. And we said, really? It's going to be this high? Really, Ford? He said, yes, it's going to be that high, and we want you to stock 2 weeks' worth over and above our daily requirements, and so we did. I thought, oh boy, I wonder what the top management is going to say about the inventory now. And the Taurus was introduced, and it sold like hotcakes. What was supposed to be a 2-week supply of parts, we ran out of in 4 days. We used up all our steel in the next few days and ran out of that in the next week. We got more steel. This is a specialized kind of steel, too, from Ryerson out of southern Indiana, or northern Indiana, and we used that up in the next week. And pretty soon, we don't have any parts for Ford, and we don't have any steel to make more parts for Ford. And my boss, the president of the company, was keeping up with that fairly well, and he approached me and said, Randall, how deep a trouble are we in? And this was on a Monday morning. And I said, we got enough for today, we got enough for tomorrow, we only have half a shipment for Wednesday, and that'll run Ford out of product by Thursday, second shift. And if you're in the automotive industry, oh my God, you don't run people out of parts. Not if you want to continue to be in the automotive industry. And he said to me, is there any hope? And I grasped at the only straw I could think of. And I said, well, we really reacted pretty fast and pretty well, given our limitations. I'm counting on some other Ford supplier to shut them down before we do. We were about to ship that last half a shipment Wednesday morning when the phone rang. It was the planner, the purchase planner from Ford, saying, stop all shipments of Taurus parts. We ran out of, we got run out of parts, and we're down for a while. And I feigned outrage. You mean somebody shut you down? It would have been me in another 2 hours, but I didn't tell him that. And the lady on the other end of the phone said, yes, it was our own transmission plant across town that shut us down because they didn't believe the forecast. And the plant manager there was held accountable for the inventory. And he said, no, I'm not going to take the hit on that inventory. I'm just going to ignore the forecast and stock what I think is right. And he was very wrong. And so we escaped a certain death there. Regardless of whether you measure operations performance on schedule attainment or promise performance, shipping schedule attainment tells you nothing anyway until it's way too late because you're reporting it at the end of the month. You need metrics to report during the month so you don't get in that situation. Because reporting after the facts, you know how that goes. It's just going to be used punitively. Nobody's really going to take the time to try to remember why this order was late and that order was late, and we don't even remember that order at all. People don't have time for that because they got a crisis now, and you'd have no time to go back and think about yesterday's crisis, do you? So what's going to happen is somebody's just going to be held accountable and beaten up, and poor person's annual performance review is going to take a hit because the company is measuring shipping schedule attainment foolishly. Determining what went wrong requires dependable memories and the time. And even if you do that And even if you make a list, there was these many quality problems, this much tooling breakage, this much failure to do preventive maintenance on the machine, even if you do that, it's still too late. You've now just given yourself an excuse for failure maybe, but you haven't done anything that'll help you get it right next time. We need to know that production is behind schedule before it becomes behind schedule. Is there any metrics like that? You just know there is no metric exactly like that, but there's multiple metrics that focus on preventing the kind of thing I just described. You can have a raw material delivery schedule attainment because you know that the order for raw steel or castings that comes in 4 days late is eventually going to cause a crisis in the machine shop or the stamping area, and eventually final assembly, and eventually you're threatening your shipment. So don't let it get there before you notice it. 1 day late, half a day late, you get on the phone and say, it better be here if you want to be our supplier anymore. That really works. How about tooling availability? I don't know how many times I was responsible for scheduling a new part that we had to get tested. And nobody mentioned that to the tooling people. They'll have it in a week or so, the tool. But, nobody in the tooling area is really involved in new product launch. They are now. Maybe we don't have a trained workforce. If Mary Ann does go in for an appendectomy, is there somebody that can run that machine, knows where to kick it when it won't run? Those are valuable things. How about component assembly schedules? Do we have a whole bunch of sub-assemblies, and the sub-assembly has to be done before we can do the final assembly, and we can't do the sub-assembly because there's a component that we don't have, slowing down the sub-assembly, slowing down the final assembly, slowing down the packaging, and making us late on our shipment. All of these things have got to be measured daily. If anything at all is behind schedule, you got to fix it. When I finally achieved a high enough level on the management team in my company's years before I retired, I had a simple rule. There's due dates on those orders, Mr. First Line Supervisor. Don't ever be late. If you are going to be late, you have to work overtime until your department's no longer late. No, I'm not going to come out and tell you you have to work overtime because I'm not going to pay people to measure your performance. I'm paying you as a supervisor to know what the standards are. Get it done. If you can't get it done, tell me. Is a machine that used to be able to put out 100 an hour now old and only capable of putting out 17 an hour? Tell me that. I can fix that. We can do all sorts of things. But I can't do anything if I'm coming to you 2 weeks after the end of the month and say, hey, that order right there, what caused that? That's useless. Nobody's going to remember that. Anything that delays production, approvals, quality, get it done. You just can't consistently accept lateness. And that's generally what we do because the people at the top are used to it. If you're not measuring the daily ingredients that control on-time shipping, and you're still shipping some of the stuff on time, it's pure luck. Congratulations, but you didn't do anything to earn that luck. You have to focus on the contributing metrics. Watch your shipping schedule attainment improve just by paying attention to all of those basics. Deb, tell us some bad stuff about available capacity.
Capacity management and capacity metrics are a particular love of mine, a focus for a lot of my work. And I love it because it's so poorly done in so many companies. Think about capacity management in your company today or some past company or your supplier's company, and that probably will bear me out. So a couple more questions. I like to ask questions. Do most companies have a capacity strategy? Do any of your companies have a capacity strategy that is known, articulated, and followed? If a company does have and I'll talk about strategies in a minute. If a company does have a capacity strategy, are there appropriate capacity metrics that align with that strategy? If yes to the first two, does the company have a consensus on required capacity, how much we need, and available capacity, how much we have? Answers no to any of those can wreak havoc with planning and managing capacity. Randall and I maintain that without a capacity strategy, there are no appropriate capacity metrics. What are you measuring if you don't know what you're trying to do with your capacity? So just a little primer, quick run through on capacity strategies. And Randall and I do an all-day seminar on capacity, and I'm just grabbing a couple little highlights here regarding capacity. Capacity strategies, three basic ones: advanced, incremental, and wait and see. Advanced strategy is acquiring capacity in advance of need. This is a strategy to support the business strategy. Why would you do that? Why would you expend your capital resources before it's absolutely necessary? Why? To dominate the market, to be ready with available capacity to take advantage of demand the minute it comes, to be able to say, we can do that, and you can, because you've got the available capacity. Not true of every marketplace, but there are plenty of companies that this is the way they operate, and that's how they get and maintain market share. The advanced strategy is by definition risky, because there's no guarantee you'll ever be able to fill that capacity. It's also the most expensive or most costly strategy, because you plan on having excess capacity before you need it. Incremental is, as the word sounds, it's adding small chunks of capacity to try to keep pace with demand. It's the most, and keep cost moderated also. It's kind of the moderate approach, and for some companies that are not able to take the risks of an advanced strategy, that might be appropriate. The third strategy is called wait and see. And this is waiting to add capacity until demand is known and in hand. As a result, it's the lowest cost strategy and may work really well for a highly competitive commodity type marketplace where cost really matters. But of course, it also means that you're risking not being ready to go when you get the business and losing market share to other companies that have the capacity. The wait and see is also has a huge downside if it becomes the default strategy. You wait and see because you haven't really decided on a strategy. We'll just wait and see. So if it becomes the default strategy, that's a real danger. So step one, in order to have metrics, you got to have something to measure. You got to have a strategy to align with. This is just a couple of examples, and there are many more. I just picked two to put in here. If you're an advanced capacity strategy, you would measure available capacity. You do not want to run out of available capacity. That's your bread and butter, is being ready in advance. And the potential rewards are great to be able to pick up market share in business. The wait and see strategy, you'd measure utilization and cost. So we've got to align these appropriately. And without a strategy, that's why we maintain there are no appropriate capacity metrics. The next portion, once you've got the strategy settled and some metrics for the strategy, the next consideration is, how do we know how much capacity we have, and how do we know how much capacity we need, and does everybody agree? How about in your companies? Does everybody agree on how much you need, how much you have, what you're capable of? Most companies It depends on who you talk to. So just a quick rundown on what available capacity is and required capacity. This is kind of textbook stuff, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But available capacity in a lean or flow environment is fairly easy to calculate. You find the limiting resources within the system, and you identify the maximum rate of flow, and that's your available capacity through that system. In other job shop or batch environments, we can use either demonstrated capacity or what's called rated capacity. The formula for rated capacity is shown here. It's available capacity is efficiency times utilization times time available. And I'm going to start from the right side of the formula. Time available is hours per shift, shifts per day, days per week. Utilization is a measure of how intensely we're using a resource. So of the time scheduled, how much time are we using that resource? And that resource could be people, or it could be machines, or it could be something else. What's the pacing resource for this system or work center? And efficiency, well, if utilization is a measure of how intensely we're using a resource, efficiency is how well we're doing against a standard. Oh, there's that word standard again. Interesting. So how we're performing against a standard, and the calculation for that is the ratio of time, standard time based on the output we've produced. So you take the number of pieces and multiply it times the standard time, divided by the actual time spent in setup and run. It's a lot of words, a lot of numbers, but there are a lot of numbers and a lot of calculations, and people have to come up with those numbers. And everybody has to agree on those numbers. But we don't always agree. But we can calculate available capacity. But every single one of those factors we have to identify, agree to, and then maintain. And that doesn't get done very often in very many companies. Even if it's done once, over time, that information erodes. Oh, and by the way, we can get real precise with this stuff too. We can take those percentages out to quite a few decimal places. Required capacity. Once again, it's easier to determine in a flow environment. Just calculate takt time. Takt time is the cycle time of demand. So what kind of output's required to meet demand? And I'll use an example with numbers that I can almost do in my head. Let's assume we have a 7.5-hour productive day, one resource, or one system, and the demand in that shift, 7.5-hour shift, the demand is 900 units. What's the takt time? I see phones coming out. Just call it out. Right, 7.5 hours is how many minutes? Productive hours, how many minutes? 450, so what's the takt time? 900 units of demand. 30 seconds, excellent. You get the Cupid doll, Ron. 30 seconds, or 2 per minute. And so you set your system to create output at 2 per minute. And you do that by adjusting crewing and things like speeds and feeds and crewing. So in a leaner flow environment, that's a lot easier. If you're not in a leaner flow environment, you use the typical required capacity calculation. And I'll start again from the right-hand side. It's runtime per unit, and that's often an engineered standard, or it's a standard that's determined based on experience as some average of what we've shown we can do. Runtime per unit times the quantity needed, plus setup time, and that would be some average setup time. And that's internal setup time, time where we're using we're adjusting equipment, cleanup, and getting to first good piece, in between different kinds of jobs. So required capacity is that formula right there. Once again, you have to interpret. Setup time is dependent on skills and staff availability, things like that. And runtime per unit Oh, boy, there's one you can take to 4 or 5 decimal places. Very precise, but how accurate is it? And do we all agree at the end of the day? We think there's something better. And this is a report that's the beginning of a tool to help develop consensus. I'll start with the left-hand columns. Let's see if I can get this over here. Left-hand columns, we have a work center here, and this could be a work cell. It doesn't necessarily have to be a work center if we've got cells or some sort of system. In this case, we have identified 3: large press, small press, and subassembly. Hours available in the second column, and they're shown here. We're not going to negotiate those hours. They're just there for an example. And then hours required at standard. At standard. So regardless whether we agree with a standard or whatever, how much work, how much time do we need at standard to accomplish the work? Now I'm going to stop right there with those 3 columns and ask you, do you see a problem right now? I see a nod. Which work center do we have a problem? Large press, yes. If we can meet 100% of standard, we're still dead in the water, right? By 500 standard hours, right? We need 500 hours more than we can get there. So this right away tells us what, some things to look at. But we haven't really developed consensus yet. So this is I just wanted you to be able to read that portion of the report. The rest of the report is showing the required hours at something less than 100% of standard. Oh, wrong one. At 90% standard, we'd create, or 90% effectiveness, we would need 5,000 hours. At 50% effectiveness, we would need 9,000 hours. Effectiveness is essentially the product of utilization and efficiency. But rather than taking things down to precision of multiple decimal points and dealing with minutia, we step back and take a look at the bigger picture. And that's what this tool does. Allows us to say, okay, how are we looking in terms of a match up between available capacity and required capacity into the future, and let's figure out if we can agree on how effective we can be in each work center. If our standards are impossible to meet, anybody have any standards that your company's never met? Rates that you've never met and never will? This allows you to recognize that, and instead of using those standards for costing, which they're used for, use just the view for capacity that says, we are never going to make 100% in this work center. What will we make, what can we make, and what can we commit to today? So for example, I do need to get this out of here. There we go. For example, in small press, at 90% effectiveness, we would need 2,222 hours to produce the work to be done. Is that a problem? No, not a problem at all. We have 4,000 hours available. But what if the reality of the small press department or the small press system is that we can't do any better than 50% of standard because the standard is no good, or maybe the standard was good and our equipment has not been maintained, or our skill sets are not where they should be, and the best we can do is in relationship to standard 50%. Now, do we have a problem? Yeah. But being able to talk about it this way, develop consensus, understand work center by work center, team by team. What can we really do today? Here, subassembly, where do we stand there? Well, if we're in trouble if we can't make between 80 and 85 and 90% of our standard. And once again, If the standards aren't good or can't be accomplished, can't be met, we need to realize that and not do it necessarily by taking everything down to 5 decimal places and adding everything up. You can do it fairly simply and talk about it. Doesn't mean it's where you're going to stay forever. There's lots of opportunity to say, well, why can't you make that standard? And then talk about that and develop processes and methods and improvements to be able to move on up the percentage effectiveness where you need to. So arrive at consensus. What are you capable of doing given the standards that you might not have any input into? Accounting might hold those numbers. Is that true for anybody here? Accounting holds the numbers for the standards? Or do they let you change the standards? Yeah, accounting often has a finger on those standards. And that's not wrong. That's not wrong. That's not bad. It's just it's a one number being used for 2 different purposes. Okay. So arrive at consensus and develop metrics based on the consensus. So just to recap, develop a capacity strategy. Develop metrics based on that strategy. Develop a consensus on your capabilities, and that's a starting place for capacity metrics. Randall has our final, I said not so beloved metric, but I suppose I should say metric we hate, and I'll turn it over to him.
The last of the filthy 5 is cycle count reporting. Here's what we don't like. The purpose of cycle count reporting, or purpose of cycle counting, much less reporting, is not universally understood. The real purpose of any cycle count program is to find and resolve the causes of variances. It's kind of like an internal process control. You find all sorts of things if you can investigate a cycle count variance all the way to the bottom and never figure out what went wrong. You find lots of things. But the causes of most cycle counts are never resolved because there's just too darn many of them, and you don't have the manpower to figure it all out and chase everyone to the bottom. And that's because, well, I teach a class on cycle counting, I think all-day seminar, though there may be one offered later this year. And the first thing I ask is, why are you guys spending money on cycle counting? I'm talking these to the people that attend the seminars. Why are you spending money on cycle counting when you know many, maybe not all, of the problems that cause you inventory variances? Why don't you just go fix those instead of wasting money cycle counting? Because the cycle counting is simply going to tell you, you know how bad we were 6 months ago? We spent a lot of money and we figured out we're just as bad now because we haven't fixed anything. We could have fixed some of this stuff before we before we spent the money. And you or the people who work for you, they do know many of these problems. Old Joe, the supervisor, got scolded because he was running too much scrap, and his response was, he ain't reporting scrap no more. There's an inventory variance. Oh, we ran out of those cotter pins that are 2 inches long, but we have some cotter pins that are 2.5 inches long, so we just went in the stockroom and took those. There's the variance. You know these things. Stop them. We also failed to identify parts that really shouldn't be in your cycle count program. You all probably have some of those. I hope you recognize them. For instance, I worked at Greenville Products, which was at the time the world's largest refrigerator factory. We made 7,200 refrigerators per day with 3,500 employees, and I was in charge of scheduling and inventory. I was young then, had a lot more energy. I could do it then. I couldn't do it now. And we put a cycle count program, and you know what we found? We found that certain parts always came up in huge variances. And when we looked at what's the nature of these were parts that we had no chance of ever getting right in the first place, but we left them in the cycle count program because we weren't smart enough not to. These are parts like paint, thinner, glue to hold the boxes together. Now, you have to have an amount for costing purposes, so the engineers put a standard on there. It was some little amount of glue and something else for paint and thinner, but how much you really use, it depends on the ambient humidity and temperature the day you're using it. That's still true today as it was 20 years ago. So you don't put paints, thinners, glue, and other things in your cycle count program because they're always going to be wrong. Don't put something in your cycle count program that's always going to be wrong. You won't like the results of that. Similarly, don't put those things in your MRP system either. I mean, they have to be on the bill of material in order to get the cost in, but put them up on some kind of visual replenishment system and just count them every couple of months to make sure the variances don't cause you production delays. But don't call those counts even then cycle counts, because they're not. A cycle count is systematic and repetitive. And these are things you never want to count because they are never going to be right. Well, there are other parts where you're using very precise amounts, exact amounts, but you still shouldn't put them in your cycle count program. I have some decals here and some star washers and a bolt and some nuts and stuff, and occasionally one falls on the floor. Am I going to pick it up? Or am I going to leave it there and allow it to be swept up? You know which parts those are in your system. It happens all the time, and it happens every day. And if you leave those kinds of parts that you know you're not going to pick up, no hourly employee is going to bend over to pick up a decal. You know these parts are always going to be wrong if you're part of your cycle count program. So don't make them part of your cycle count program. And don't make them the inventory controlled by MRP, for exactly the same reason. Also, cycle count programs in almost every company I've ever seen, they don't allocate enough manpower to analyze all the variances. Now, I've just explained why we have way too darn many variances to ever look at. But even if you take the parts out that you can't possibly ever get right, and even if you fix the known problems before you start cycle counting, like, make old Joe write scrap tickets, please, that kind of thing, you're still going to have some variances, not as many, but probably more than you can analyze. And the biggest problem, of course, is we failed to assign responsibility for inventory accuracy. I talked about that earlier. Who's responsible for this inventory? You know? Why is... You know, in most companies, you know who is held accountable? The cycle counter. Figure out what went wrong and change it. Sure. Yeah, this 45-year veteran supervisor is going to listen to this 19-year-old newbie. It ain't going to happen. But if the people above you don't understand it exactly that way, that's what you're going to end up with. People giving instructions who have no clue and have never had to bother with cycle counts. I always thought it would be nice to be promoted to the top with ever having to do things like cycle counts, or even worse, engineering changes. Isn't it nice to be promoted and not ever having to deal with that hard stuff? You know, the only thing you got to do is get a master's degree in business, and you can skip all the hard stuff. As a result, what we do get when we cycle count is just a one-point-in-time correction of the balances. Yeah, we had a lot of them. We counted 50 this month, and 48 had variances, and we just changed the numbers. Well, that's good. That is accomplishing something. But it's not accomplishing what a cycle count is supposed to accomplish. Because the metric that we use, which is how many counts, how many were accurate, how many were inaccurate, that's basically how the metric is structured. They simply measure the outcome. number of counts versus the number of variances. We got to stop that. Instead, we have to measure the process by which inventory records remain accurate. And the variances have to be reviewed as the result of violating a required process. You have to investigate it, and you have to fix it. I'm going to give you an example. Tom Holland and I were talking earlier, and so I gave him this example, and he thought it was a good example, so I'm going to give it to everybody. I have here a purchase casting. All purchase parts come into the receiving department. So there's a transaction that occurs in the receiving department called, I received this, and there's a supervisor responsible for that. It may be one of his subordinates that actually fills out the paper or clicks it into the computer, but he's responsible. And then it goes to the stockroom, and I am the stockroom supervisor. So what do? I have to put it away. I put it on shelf A27, and I tell the computer, I put it on shelf A27. So now I have done a transaction. And later I get told to deliver that to the machining department, and so I take it to Deb, because she's the machining supervisor, and she drills a hole in there, faces it off or something, but it changes part numbers at that point. So it's now a different part number. But this part number was A101, and 3 people are in charge. Jim, the receiving supervisor, Randall, the stockroom supervisor, and Deb, the machining supervisor. Now, 2 weeks later, we have a variance in the cycle count for A101. Who's responsible for that? Well, you know, yeah, Deb. Thank you. That gets right to the point. There's only 3 people who could possibly be responsible because only 3 people touched the transaction. And when I was in charge of companies, production operations anyway, I didn't have cycle counter go out and investigate anything. Those 3 people did the investigation, and by God, they'd better find out what happened. And how did I enforce that? Jim's supervisor number 1, and I'm supervisor number 2, Deb's supervisor number 3, and there may be 20 others in the department, and everybody who touches every single part that's part of the cycle count program is evaluated by the results of the cycle count. So, part A101, user-defined computer field, 01 is in charge, 02 is in charge, 03 is in charge. A101 has a variance that's unacceptable, black star against supervisor 1, 2, and 3. If it's within a tolerance limit, and the limits are A and B and C, you know, for expensive stuff versus cheap stuff, then we get a gold star. At the end of the year, we had better make improvements, or either A or B, or 1 or 2 or 3 are gone, because there are going to be parts that Deb never touches. There's going to be manufactured parts that don't go through receiving. There's going to be parts that change and then move to the next operation that never go through the stockroom. So there's other parts in which the route is 1, 4, and 17. And so even though we share this part, there's lots of other parts we don't share. And at the end, anything that I'm responsible for, it will come out in the wash, and vice versa, everybody else. And I gave everybody goals. You better be better than you were last year. That's the only goal in year 1. In year 2, you better be 95% accurate. You can be 90% accurate, and I'll still give you a raise. But if you're 95% accurate, I'm going to give everybody twice as much. Everybody. Get the word everybody. If everybody is going to get a big raise, you think there might be some peer pressure on that one hard head that just doesn't want to work with you? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We have to eliminate the known causes of variances. We have to remove inappropriate parts from cycle counting. We have to provide adequate staffing to both count and analyze the variances. And we have to, most of all, assign responsibility for inventory accuracy, not to the cycle counter, not to the inventory manager, but to the people who actually make the mistakes or not. And we have to develop process metrics to identify and eliminate the causes of the variances. Old Joe just won't write scrap tickets. Okay, we're going to see how many parts that run through Joe's department get scrap. And we're going to measure that, and it better start going down, the numbers. Yes, I am talking about holding first-line supervisors responsible for things, just like they do in real companies. And too many do not. These people are sacrosanct. Their hard job is hard. Yes, it is. But we're not paying them to get close to right. We're paying them to be right. If you noticed, all of the metrics we don't like in all 5 of these are outcome-based. Inventory turns, PPV, shipping schedule attainment, capacity metrics, cycle count reporting, they measure the inevitable results of processes. We got to stop that. That's too late. We got to start measuring the processes that, if done right, lead to success. Not just the results of what the heck we're doing, because that's only showing us we're not doing it very right. Here's the last one you got to look at tonight. Too many metrics either don't get you where you want to go, or in some cases, they may even prevent you from getting there because they refocus your attention where it shouldn't be. So when it comes to metrics, these aren't the only bad ones. These are just our favorite bad ones. And we suggest we shouldn't hate them. We really ought to tell you to fix them. On behalf of Deb and I, thank you.
Okay, thank you both, Deb and Randall, for your great talk tonight. A lot of good, interesting facts in there. So, anyway, this concludes tonight. So there's a few odds and ends at the food table. So help yourself, and if not, hope to see you next month at our PDM. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Pardon? Founders, yes, it is the tour of Founders. So if you want to sample some beer, come on out and see how the supply chain works. That's important too, but beer, Anyway, yes, sir. It's just a regular tour. They talk about how they go through the process of making the beer, but yeah, it's a regular tour. It's not necessarily a total behind the scenes. So, any other questions? So, again, thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you both, Deb and Randall, for being here tonight. We appreciate it very much. Have a good evening.